Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you joining us from different parts of the world today. My name is Anita, and I'm the library manager at the British Council in Chennai, India. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to the Readers Club session today titled Literature Response to Global Challenges. This is a timely and thought provoking theme, especially as we mark World Environment Day this month. So, this session is being hosted as a part of our digital library programming. To formally open our session, it's my honor to invite our chief guest, Jill Richens, Director of Arts, South Asia, who has been instrumental in driving cultural engagement across the region. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you so much, and hello to everyone on the call today. My name is Jill Richens, and I am the Director of Arts for the British Council in South Asia. In my role, it is my pleasure to work with artists from across the region, from the UK and across the world, and also to meet arts-loving audiences such as yourselves. I'm particularly excited to be here today to talk about literature. This is going to be a fantastic space to kind of foster discussion and debate, but also to share, I believe, some fantastic recommendations that we're going to hear later. So before I introduce our facilitator for today's session, I wanted to briefly discuss our digital library. The British Council's digital library is available in over 30 countries with over 150,000 registered members. Our library houses content of interest to a wide spectrum of audiences ranging from avid to occasional readers. I will let you all decide where you sit on that spectrum. The digital library also provides access to resources for learning, for professional development, and for academic growth. And through the British Council's digital library, we aim to curate and showcase the best of UK resources. Now, in addition to this content, we have events such as today, where we organise online programming ranging from author talks, book reading, reading clubs, and storytelling sessions. Our aim is to create a community where we can discuss our love of literature, alongside creating a space where we can consider and debate literature's position in today's evolving world. As just mentioned, today's session was designed in response to World Environment Day that we marked earlier this month. Now, I am extremely delighted to welcome our facilitator for this session, Hamza Koudri. I mentioned my love of arts earlier, but one thing I really love about my role is the fantastic colleagues and networks of people around the world that I get to meet. When I joined the British Council, I was asked what my secret talent was. And I was told that everyone at the British Council has a secret talent. I met someone who had previously been a ballet dancer, someone who'd performed at musical festivals. And yes, again, I am put to shame by another colleague with an absolutely tremendous talent that we're going to hear a lot more about today. So Hamza Koudri currently serves as country director with the British Council in Algeria. He holds an MA in English Literature and Civilization and has been working in education and international development for over 16 years. In 2022, his debut historical novel, Sand Roses, was shortlisted for the Island Prize. Hamza has also co-authored an article on social responsibility discretion in Algeria, which was published in Responsible Management in Africa with Emerald Publishing. Today's session will explore how literature transports us across time and space and helps us understand lives, emotions, and experiences different from our own. We will get to experience how writers tackle global issues like climate change, migration, and gender inequality through powerful stories that cross borders and unite humanity. So without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Hamza. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you for that introduction. And welcome everybody to today's session on literature and global challenges. If you give me just 1 second, I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and I'm happy to get us going. All right. If just one of the colleagues can confirm that my screen is visible.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So I think I'd like us to start with a session outline. As you can see here, what we're hoping to do today, we'll start with a little bit of a warmer, try to get to know the people who are on the session today with us. Then we'll start going into the link between literature and global challenges. Why are we talking about this and why is there a link? And then the third activity would be a sort of a group activity. We're going to be in breakout rooms and we're going to have a little bit of a practice looking at some excerpts and trying to answer some questions. And then we'll talk about some tips on how to engage actively with literature as readers. And then finally, we're going to come up with a collective suggested reading list on the topic. I am here including the 4 titles I will probably be referring the most to the most. But we might come up with some more titles or books. The idea, hopefully, by the end of the session, is we will grow our understanding of how literature usually tackles global challenges and issues, and how we as readers can engage with that experience actively. And then we'll come up hopefully with our reading list that we would like to tackle in the future. If you've read these books, then don't worry. I think hopefully we'll have a little bit more of a chance for you to comment on them. But if you haven't, then I'd highly recommend them. But we'll see at the end if you're interested in reading those. I'd like us to start with a little bit of a warmer, where my colleague in a second will put a poll up. And then what I'd like you to do is just to tell us 3 things. Where are you joining us from today? What time is it? And what's the temperature right now in Celsius, if we can? An example here is I'm joining today from Algeria. The time right now is 12:37. I was counting it to be 40, but it's 12:37. But the temperature is 31, but it's feeling a little bit hotter here in Algeria specifically. So if I can ask my colleague to come up with a poll, Anita. And then I'd like you guys to tell us where you're coming from. And actually stop sharing for a second so we can see. So the first question will be, where are you coming from? So where are you joining from? Okay, if you can't see the poll, then feel free to use the chat. I see some people have already done that. All right, we have somebody joining from Greece, Pakistan, India, Dubai. All right, I see in the chats, Nigeria, Egypt.
Hello.
Fantastic.
I'm also joining from Algeria.
Nice. Welcome. All right, I got somebody from Coventry. All right, we'll give this 1 more minute. So please put in your answers if you haven't yet. And I'm looking at the times. We have quite a few people in the middle of the day, but some people are a bit later in the afternoon. So thank you for making the time for this. See, 37 degrees. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's very good to see this diversity of countries represented here in the session. Hopefully, we'll also get to talk about literature that's also coming from those places. Because this is also something that I really enjoy about literature, is finding out about stories from different places. All right. Without further ado, let's go back to our session. Thank you so much for putting the answers. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to put up a quote, and this is mostly to test whether you read the description in the registration form or not. Because if you did, you might have the answer to this question. Can you guess the name of the person behind this quote that you can see here? A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one. Can you put your answers in the chat, maybe, if you know the person who said that, the writer. Somebody says Oscar Wilde. I say it's somebody famous. Anybody else guess? Can you use the chat to guess the name of the writer behind this? All right, I see Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Yes, okay, quite a few people say George R.R. Martin. That's the correct answer, actually. And so I really like this quote because I think it's very accurate in terms of what literature helps us experience. And at least in my experience as a reader, I like to use these stories to travel to different places, different times, and sometimes imaginary places and times, and learn more about mostly the people and the way they live and how they're impacted by life in general. In the context of global challenges, mainly around climate change, migration, but also gender issues, I think literature allows us to live those issues or challenges from the perspective of a different person. We get to know, what they're aspiring for, what they'd like to do, and how they're impacted, how sort of a challenge like global climate change is impacting their daily lives, but also what emotions they're going through. And I think it helps us identify with that. And we'll go back to more on that, but I really like this quote and I wanted to start with it. Also, I'd like to engage. I should have warned you guys, I'm going to be engaging you a lot in the chat and all of their activities. But when you think of these three main issues, but also other global challenges you can think of, are there any books that you can think of that really help you gain insights on global challenge? And this is where we start to get a little bit of a reading list together. But really, when you think of that, have you ever experienced a book that you read that really taught you something about a topic that you'd like to share with us here in the chat? So do you want to take a minute in the chat and put in some titles, please? All right, so Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. I love that book. I think so it talks about racial segregation in South Africa, right, Sarah?
Yes, yes, exactly.
All right, fantastic, thank you. Any other titles? Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. I don't know that one. Flight Behavior, Barbara Kingslover. All right, some really good titles. To Kill a Mockingbird and The Wretched of the Earth. I love that because we're going to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird. All right. Beauty Sick, Sarah Gunn. We Need Your Art. Okay, so those are some really good titles. Thank you so much for putting them in. Keep them coming. We're going to move on, but please keep those titles coming because then we're going to come back and put together a list and hopefully for other people to benefit from that as well. All right. So one big question that people get asked, and I myself get asked a lot as a writer, is does that mean, when we talk about literature and global challenges, does this mean that the writer's main job is to raise awareness on global challenges? Does that mean that every book that you write or anything that you work on as a writer needs to have a link with global challenges? Is that the main sort of role that you're doing as a writer? Or maybe a question for you as readers is, do you mostly enjoy books that have some kind of lesson to learn about global challenges? Or what is the main point of literature, I guess? What's the main role of the writer? Can you say in the chat, what do you think? Does that mean that the writer's main job is to raise awareness on global challenges? Okay, can wait for the chat one more time. Yes and no, Katarina says. Could I invite Katarina to come to turn her mic on and explain? Yes and no. And Yvette, that's a very good question. Who decides on the duty of the writer?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I think I would say that literature is primarily would be good to invite, a reflection upon what's happening in the world. But sometimes there is also like the need for the readers as well as the writers to have a time away from the reality itself, the current realities. So yeah, I think we, as a reader, as well as a writer, I also do seek for windows where there's nothing to do, there's nothing necessarily connected to the politics and what's happening, but let's say, for example, is about Earth and like say it's more ecocentric. Although again, even if it's ecocentric, one way or another, eventually it will lead you to reflect on where you are and how true you are and how whether you're speaking up or not. But me in that in a very indirect way. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. Thank you, Katerina. That's very helpful. And I see some other answers in the chat. Someone saying it's not always for the sake of the plot, but the meaning it conveys. Jill says, no, I think it's about the reader to interpret. And I like that. I think, the writer shouldn't be dictating. And I think, to be honest, there's a lot of opinions around this, but I, as a writer, what I like to think is the main job of the writer should always be to tell a good story, to create really good characters, good characters that people can identify with. And then if that, so whatever theme you're working on, if there's any lessons learned, as Jill says, it's up to the reader to interpret this. And to me, if the story makes the readers identify with the characters and experience something different from what they're used to, and ideally maybe ask questions. If it makes them ask questions or reflect on a certain topic, then that's a plus. That's great. But I don't think we should be distracted from telling a good story and having good characters, because I think, to me, it could be a little bit counterintuitive, because if we go to, and we're going to talk about it, we go to literature, we resort to literature to have a good time, to experience a good story, to identify with people sort of that have different experiences from us. Then if our literature is a bit more with an agenda, if it's too much focused on agenda, I think, to be honest, it might lose the value of literature. So that's where I stand. But I think, some people could have different opinions on the matter. But why we resort to literature, I think, typically it depends on the reader and their sort of their experience. But to me, we're always looking for characters we can identify with, or sometimes, characters we don't identify with, but we can understand their perspective. It helps us sort of live past experiences that we're not able to imagine. And so the writer sort of helps us recreate those experiences, and we can live through them as readers. But sometimes too, and we're going to see examples where we can also live imagined futures. What could happen if this situation were to happen in our lives? And so that always happens through those identifiable characters. If I were walking in, say, 1700 India, or in the year 2100 sort of in South Africa, what would my experience be like if I were living there? Literature also speaks to basic human emotions and draws on empathy, and that's very important. I think, a lot of the times when you take any book, we can talk a lot about the themes and the issues in that story, but really, I think it always comes down to, basic emotions like love and hate, and sometimes, the sort of the urge to defend, your family, or, sometimes survival is the main theme. And so it comes back to those simple human experiences. And that, to be honest, is usually universal. And, anybody in the world, whether they're living here or in different country or in different time, I think everybody can identify with those basic emotions and themes. I think, and that those 3 points, when we have identifiable characters, we can live an experience and we're drawing from emotions. I think that this is a powerful tool to connect with people across time and space. And I think this comes back to this link between literature and global challenges. By having really effective, good storytelling, ideally we're creating a sense of empathy with, again, different people who are in different places and different experiences. And sometimes, not necessarily, sometimes that takes to a level of activism if we grow in awareness of a certain topic. I really need to reiterate, I don't think it should be the main topic of literature, but I think the type of literature that's engaged, that tackles a certain issue usually leads to empathy and hopefully activism. And we're going to see an example of that. If you see here, we're going to take a case study of To Kill a Mockingbird and the fight against segregation in the US in the 1960s. I'm picking up this example because this is a book that I worked on in my master's thesis a lifetime ago. And I don't know if anybody knows, I'm sure a lot of people probably know the famous book To Kill a Mockingbird. But this was a book that was published in the 1960s, but the events take place in the 1930s in the US, in the South. This is the basic synopsis is Atticus Finch is a lawyer and he takes on a court case where he defends an African American in a case against white people in that neighborhood who accuse him of rape. This action creates a lot of controversy in their hometown and then brings a lot of unwanted attention to his family. The whole book is told from the point of view of his daughter, Scout. And then in that book, we tackle a lot of issues around segregation in general, social segregation, mainly race, but we can also see examples of gender and class. This is an example where, the book doesn't really sort of dictate any themes or doesn't sort of give us any lessons sort of that are very obvious there. But by living through the eyes of this kid, and I think it gives her a little bit of an innocent view on life, it helps us see that life differently. So she's commenting on people sort of like, who are making judgments, so you have some of the racist people are making judgments on sort of the South African Americans, but also how women have a different role. And then you have these people who try to make a change in society. And then she also sort of compares between people who go sort of like confrontationally against society versus people like her father, who still accept sort of the norms, but also try to change things in a different way, in a very small, subtle way. What this book did in the 1960s is it was such a sensational sort of book that created a lot of sort of controversy, but also it helped humanize the African Americans at the time. So this was a book where they were seeing, the African American characters as people, as opposed to sort of like, a mass, and that was important. But it was also starting conversations on segregation, and that's really important too at the time, especially when it was complementing and sort of like, accompanying the civil rights movement in the US. This was 1960s, they were talking about Martin Luther King, we're talking about all of the cases that were happening across, especially the South. And then so this was really a good time for that book to be creating that conversation. And this was an example of how literature can really lead to empathy and then activism. From the 1960s, there were times when it was banned in books, but also was taught at schools for the relevance to civic education. So people would be reading the book and commenting on that. In the book club discussions or the school, they would be talking about the civic education aspect of the book, but also the legal ethics implications. So some of the law schools, the law firms were also taking this case as an example. And so this is what I wanted to talk a little bit about To Kill a Mockingbird and sort of this fight against segregation in the 1960s. I'd like to come up with one more, I'm not going to come up, but I'm just going to show one more quote. This is from E.M. Foster, so I won't make you guys guess who it's from. And so the saying is, the king died and then the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is plot. And I first learned about this quote from my Arabic literature teacher in high school. And actually what he said, and I like that a little bit better, he said, the king died and then the queen died is history. So I think he changed the quote a little bit. And the king died and the queen died of grief is a story. However you put it, there is a difference between how so there's two events, they're the same, but the way you phrase it makes the whole difference between a story and a plot, or in my Arabic literature teacher's case, the difference between a history and story. What is the difference? Can I ask people to comment in the chat? What do you think makes the difference between the first statement and the second statement? The king died and then the queen died versus the king died and then the queen died of grief. I know grief is the main thing, but why does it make it a little bit different? What does grief do for us? Let's see if I can see the chat. All right, so somebody, Zainab saying it's relatable. It showcases the relationship. Okay, that's good. What else? Thank you, Yvette. It's actually from fact to emotion. And to me, this is a different, this is the difference between a history book and fiction, right? Especially, you know, I like to write historical fiction, and so the difference between a history book and historical fiction, to me, is that a history book gives you a lot of events. It focuses on sort of what happened, the dates, maybe sort of the main sort of actors. A story focuses on the human experience, on the human emotion. And to me, that's what makes all the difference. Yes, thank you so much, Iman. The second seems to evoke empathy, and I think that's what makes a difference. And I think we can all agree that, you know, even when you go to things like, you know, marketing or, business development, everybody always talks about how if you give stories, it makes all difference, as opposed to if you go to a meeting and you're talking about numbers and statistics and sort of, you know, if you're telling a technical account of what happened, this is good. It shows that sort of, you know what you're doing. The numbers are always good. But what makes a difference is if you tell a human story, because then it makes whoever is listening to you empathize with that story and imagine themselves going through that experience. And I think it always helps us achieve a lot of objectives. And so if we're trying to tackle global issues, I think that's the difference between writing nonfiction. And I love nonfiction, make no mistake. I love reading about it. I love listening to audiobooks about nonfiction. But I think fiction and stories help us engage with certain challenges in a different way. And I would like us to actually do that in a minute. We're going to do a deep dive. We're going to have some practice where we try to engage with a couple of, actually 3 stories, excerpts of stories. But really what I wanted to look at here is mostly the sort of like, you know, how it happens across those 3 issues. So we have climate change, we have migration, we have gender. If you're really into climate change, then you probably know that there is a whole genre of literature called, cli-fi or eco-lit. So it's basically, you know, climate fiction, or so it's literature that really talks about, a specific challenge, which is climate change. And the literary techniques, so this is a whole different genre. And then usually what happens is usually a speculative future. So here, most of the times, and now maybe sometimes it's not very speculative, but most of the time it's books where they imagine a story where climate change has gone to a little bit of an extreme. You know, a lake dried up in a certain place, or there is flood, or there is sort of like violent weather in a certain situation. And so how a certain community would live around that through different characters. One book that touches on that, even though the focus is in climate change, but it's speculative and it has that element to it, is Never by Ken Follett, who's one of my favorite writers. He typically writes historical fiction, but he has one modern sort of fiction that happens in the near future, and it's about sort of like, you know, he's imagining a whole different sort of scenario. And one of the small plots is around a lake that dries up in Chad, and it's not very far from actually what's going on right now. But then he talks about how this creates a whole impact around, you know, people's livelihood, how they're not able to make a living because they typically would go there fishing. And then so how it also drives a push towards sort of migration. So a lot of people would be migrating and then also living through that experience of migration. And I think that really captures that whole human experience, because, you know, we're not just seeing the statistics around what's going on or a picture of a lake, but really seeing how it impacts the people who are, you know, trying to make a living for themselves and their families. And it takes us to migration, and usually migration is a bit different. Most of the time we have books that showcase migration narratives. Usually it's a memoir or oral histories, but sometimes, you know, other forms of fiction where we sort of live through the experience of migrants, you know, as they cross seas or deserts or other places. And the idea is how, so the suffering and, you know, for example, you will push them to go there, and then sort of their experience through the migration, but also once they arrive in their destination, if they do, what kind of experience they have with that. One other book that I really like that captures that, even though it focuses more on her experience as a migrant, is Discretion by an Algerian writer called Faiza Gan. And that's one thing where sort of one example of how she talks also about her experience as a woman as a female Algerian in France, but also as an Algerian migrant who sort of lives through that. And I think it reads a little bit more like a memoir. And I think it's really one of the examples that showcases this. In migration, books that are about migration usually talk about themes of belonging, identity, and cultural bridges, because a lot of the times you have these people who bridge two cultures, and so they try to make a space for themselves. They try to find their belonging. Are they still sort of belonging to their original culture, or how do they fit in within this new identity or this new environment that they just moved into? And then we have gender as an issue, and I think this has been going on a little bit longer. We have a lot of books that talk about women's experiences in different settings and how they're especially experiencing some type of oppression or segregation because of their race or because of their gender. And a lot of the times, gender usually intersects with other types of literature. So you'd find book that sort of, touches on migration, but also gender is there, or climate change, or even other topics. So it's one of those themes that, some of the books would focus specifically on that, but I think it's really difficult to talk about any human experiences without really touching on the gender issue. And I think it's important, and people are raising their awareness around that. Usually what helps too with gender is you have diverse voices from around the world. So an experience of an Asian woman would be different from an American woman, from an African woman, and the experience of an African woman living in Europe would be completely different from an African woman living in Africa. And I think that's the value of literature, is it brings all of these diverse voices, and sort of it helps us, learn about those different experiences. Usually in gender, we're using storytelling to challenge stereotypes and patriarchy. And so one other technique that the writers sometimes use is they would give you an example of a different experience, a family that lives that has different gender roles, or a woman that goes up against sort of the status quo and changes something, maybe sometimes at small scale or maybe at a larger scale. And I think those are really important sort of ways to just help people imagine, yes, we're so used to the current status quo, but here's an example of how life could be different if this were to happen, right? And so these were just sort of almost like lessons learned for us to say, well, life doesn't really need to be the same way it is right now if we were just to change this little thing about it. I think we're ready. I think I've talked enough. I think we're ready for the breakout room. So I'm going to explain instructions for a second. And then what we'll do is we'll post some pictures for you to save on your computer or your phone so we don't lose them. And then we'll send you to breakout room. So everybody will be assigned a breakout room between 1 and 6. We'll have 6 total. We will have 3 sets of excerpts from 3 different books. And so groups 1 and 4, you see, will be talking about excerpt 1. Groups 2 and 5 will be working on excerpt 2. And then groups 3 and 6 will be working on excerpt 3. This is all here. I think my colleague will put in the screenshots in the chat in a second.
Yeah,
so
totally.
once you go to your groups, would like you to first assign a facilitator and reporter, somebody to just facilitate the conversation and then report to us afterwards. It's important to do it at the beginning because then, if time runs out and then you come back and then you don't have anybody to report. So let's do it first. Who's going to facilitate the conversation and then report? Then would like you to spend 10 minutes reading through the excerpts. Excerpts aren't very long. They should take you less than a minute to read. And then would like you to talk about these 4 questions. They will also be in the screenshots. So please save those questions. And then when you're back, would like you to report your answers. We'll spend some more minutes reporting from the various groups. Could I, from my teaching experience, I have to ask somebody to repeat the instructions before we send you to your breakout rooms. Can I ask anybody to turn on? So maybe if you raise your hand and then we'll just ask somebody to repeat the instructions if I could. Any brave soul to repeat the instructions for us? I see somebody I can pick on. Oh, there you go. I was going to pick on somebody. Okay, but Sarah, go ahead.
Yes, so we are asked to read something and then we will tackle the 4 questions and report back the answers, right?
Fantastic. But please do not forget to identify a facilitator/reporter.
The ones who's going to report back.
Yes, and then you need to know which groups. It will be in the screenshots. All right. We have the screenshots in the chat. Please save them before you go to your breakout rooms. And I think we're ready to go to the breakout rooms.
Right, done.
We're back in 10 minutes. Okay. See, people are All right. So I'm hoping the breakout room worked. I know some people struggled a little bit. But I know also other groups did have a good conversation. So could I ask, so I'll just say group one, if you remember, and then could I ask somebody from group one, or actually, how about this? Whoever wants to start, maybe if you can raise your hand, we'll do it that way better. And just report quickly on what you read and what reflections you had. Anybody from group one, maybe? We just need one brave soul to get us started, and then we'll go. There you go. Kotar, go for it. Thank you.
Sarah is our facilitator. Sarah, would you like to report on what we've discussed?
Nice job, Kotar. Just put Sarah on spotlight.
I'm
Hello,
sorry.
yes. No, I mean, we are group 2, no?
Yeah.
That's fine. Go for it, Sarah.
Oh,
It's
okay.
fine.
No, all right, sure. I thought you were okay. So we read an excerpt about a woman who was in a very bad state. Like it seems like she hasn't showered, she hasn't slept for a while, and then she was describing some people around her waiting in a queue and so on. And the main theme seems to be poverty, immigration, mental health issues. And the emotions that the passage evoked are discomfort, fear, inferiority. And the next question was, how did the writer manage to evoke these emotions? By being very descriptive. She or he was very descriptive, especially by starting by describing the physical state of the woman and the other people around, how some of them were waiting in a queue, some were not interested because they were using earphones and so on. And the last question was, how does a passage like this help us gain insight on issues on hand? It makes us empathize with the characters and want to know more and maybe help them or something like that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that, Sarah. And
You're
then
welcome.
these are two excerpts from one of my favorite books, Crooked Seas by Karen Jennings. And we see, do you see here what the characters are doing, Sarah? So they're lighting up for what?
Yeah, it's not clear.
You can see here there's two armed guards patrolling the outer edges. One more stood near the water truck, right?
Are they crossing borders? Crossing borders?
So they're actually lining up to take water from a water truck.
Okay.
Yeah, and so this is, the setting is in I think in Cape Town, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, it's in South Africa, and we have this woman who wakes up, and her biggest challenge is she has to be very moderate with the way she uses water. That's why she's smelling very badly, and but also she needs to go and line up to get her ration of water, which may not be a big, so may not be very far from a lot of experiences maybe of people around the world. But in the context of South Africa, I think this is something in the near future, where so the writer is imagining a sort of an imagined future, but in the the next few years actually. Anyways, so thank you so much for that, Sarah. Can I ask somebody who read either excerpt 3 or 1, maybe to chime in? Anybody from groups 1 or 4? How about groups 3 or 6? Anybody? All right, Noor, go for it.
Hi. Yeah, we tackled the third one.
Thank you.
So from what we read, I can tell that the setting is in either a refugee camp or a temporary shelter. But you can tell that the characters are really isolated, alienated, but also distant and quiet in that place. So people wait there and don't really belong. So the global issue that was tackled is primarily migration. The journey itself, what it feels like inside, it feels like they were maybe forced to leave everything behind in Aleppo. And also the emotions that were evoked there, we talked about a sense of fear, a sense of nostalgia, being far away from home, and it doesn't feel safe for them there anymore. But I also sensed a big feeling of grief and numbness. Like they're feeling those emotions, but they're also really numb to what is happening, and they're trying to get through it, basically.
Yeah.
And as for the third question, what was the third question?
Oh, here.
Those, yeah, how did the writer manage to evoke those emotions? Yeah, for the way they evoke those emotions, we talked about imagery like my friend Iman said, dead flowers, but also a sense of dialogue and monologue. There in the second paragraph, as you can see, there was a bit of a dialogue between them to showcase the deep sadness and the deep grief that they're feeling. But in the rest of the paragraphs, basically, there was symbolism, and there was almost like a stream of consciousness, almost. And then in the fourth question, how does this help us understand the issue? I feel like it makes us feel what it's like to be in their shoes. It makes us feel the uncertainty, the weight of their memories, their experiences. My friend said something beautiful, which was that it moves us through the circumstances as they were experienced by stimulating the senses, like the dust storms, the bombs, etc. But also, it's all about emotional survival. We understand the issue through those facts, but also through the raw human experience felt. That's it, I guess.
Thank you so much. Very beautifully put. Thank you so much, Noor. This is very
Thank you. I
helpful.
appreciate it. Thank you.
And yeah, exactly. Like you said, again, this is a topic of migration, and then we're living through the human experience. I love what you said about sort of like evoking the sort of the senses, but also the emotions of the characters. I love that second piece where, you know, we start from a drawing, right? She stopped drawing, and then there was a side of the picture that was left without color. And then strangely, this reminded the character of, you know, white crumbling street once the war came. And I think we can all identify about how, you know, with how some of the most random things sometimes can sort of bring up some memories. In this case, not very pleasant ones. But again, this is, I think, what makes the whole story very human and how we can connect with that experience. So thank you for that, Noor. We're running out of time, but I'd like to just do one last slide, and then hopefully we'll maybe, if we have time, maybe we'll do 5 minutes for questions and answers. And I look to my colleagues to see if we have time for that. But really, I think just some tips in terms of why, you know, sort of how we can engage actively with literature as readers. First, I think, you know, to me, it's important to read what you care about and topics. You read about topics that you really want to learn more about. So I think we want to identify the issues that you'd like to learn more about. If this is something that's really something you care about, if it's whether it's migration or climate change or any other topic, I think you want to identify that first. You'd like to expand your reading lists gradually. I always sort of, my advice when people ask me for advice, I'll say, you know, if you're expanding your reading list, don't go sort of in one go very far away from what you're usually used to. So like, if you're used to reading, in my case, I'm used to reading a lot of historical fiction. If I'd like to expand it, I'd do it gradually. So maybe historical fiction that touches on a specific topic. And then, step by step, I can go into that new sort of area. Take time to reflect on your on your reading, the insights that you learn from there. It's always helpful to take notes if you can, because that sort of encourages you, it pushes you a little bit to think about what you just read. I love it when sort of, if you're okay with that, you can sort of highlight some passages and you come back and think about those if they have an impact. You can discuss the topic with like-minded people. I think today was a great session for us to be doing that. But, if you can find friends or other people, either online or in person, that you can discuss those topics, it's a great way for you to engage actively. And then again, we've seen how sometimes some of those insights can take from, story to empathy to action. So think of small or big actions that you can take within your control, sort of to tackle that challenge. Can you use the water more moderately if you see sort of that impact? Can you maybe call on an action that's sort of, creating an uncomfortable situation for women at your workplace? Can you do anything about sort of migration? Can you share, your insights maybe with the people in your network? So anything that you can do, any action you can take can help sort of tackle this issue. If you're into writing, maybe write engaged fiction or nonfiction, whatever you're into. But or it could be an essay, it could be a reflection, it could be a post on social media. But that's one way you can sort of process what you learned and sort of actively engage with that topic. If you have any other tips, please drop them in the chat. And I think that brings us to our last word cloud. If I can ask my colleague, what I'm going to ask you to do is we're hoping to put together a reading list, right? Which we started at the beginning. I'm hoping now you've thought of new titles. But if my colleague Anita can start the next word cloud, if you could put the, on topic. So for example, on migration, I'd like to suggest Discretion by Faizagan, and that's my entrance, so my entry for this word cloud. If I could ask people to do something similar on any topic, you can have more than one answer. Put in your suggestions, and then we'll download it and share it with everybody, hopefully. Could I ask my colleague to start the poll? All right, and I'm going to put
started, so.
Thank you. So again, on the topic, so for example, on migration, I'm going to write Discretion, which is the book title, by author. Please again. All right, somebody suggested 80. Give everybody a minute. Okay. See Virginia Woolf. Okay, so there's 3 suggestions around gender. Orchestra of Minorities. Another book. All right, well, the answers are coming in. I think we're a little bit over time, but maybe we'll take the next 4 or 5 minutes. If anybody has burning questions or comments, we'll take just a few quick minutes before we hand it over for closure. Okay, Koter, go for it.
Yes, I have a question and a comment at the same time. First of all, thank you so much for this. It was really interesting. It's just something that happens to me sometimes when I read a book and then everybody like says good things about that book, but I can't quite immerse myself within it, and then I feel so guilty, and I force myself to continue reading even though I don't enjoy it. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure a lot of readers have had that experience. I have had that experience, and to be honest, I really think, again, going back to the point at the beginning, that the point of literature is to tell really good stories, and I think because those stories are, they're really effective if they touch on that human aspect. I think if you don't see yourself engaging with it, it's fine. It doesn't mean anything is wrong. I think it's just not the right for you. You're not a good match. I think, just like, meeting somebody, you don't have to be friends with them because it doesn't mean you're bad or they're bad. You're just not aligning. So I think I would actually suggest maybe stopping to read the book. Maybe you can come back to it another time. At one point, it happened to me. I read 1984. Everybody loved it. I didn't engage with it at the beginning. And yes, I was forcing myself to read, but what happened is I was just not reading, and then I wasn't reading anything. So the minute I dropped it, I was able to read something I enjoyed. A few years later, I went back to it, and actually, I had changed. My thoughts had sort of, I think my level of maturity had changed by then, and then I was able to enjoy it much better. So I'd say, drop it, don't feel guilty about it, and find something that you really engage with. Thank you,
Thank
Kota.
you so much.
Any other points, questions, comments? And thank you for the messages in the chat. There's
Any more
Nathan is
questions?
asking about children's literature. I don't know if Anita or Niti, you can answer that one.
Yeah, sure.
So while people are responding, to touch upon children's literature, Digital Library do plan out events for children and families. And through the newsletter, we keep you posted. You can also come to our website to find more information. Hope you are receiving our newsletter if you are a member of the Digital Library, and there are events to answer to your question.
Thank you so much. If you don't have any other questions, I think I'll hand it over to my colleagues for closer. But just wanted to say a big thank you for joining us today and for allowing me to talk about literature. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hamza.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Sahar.
Okay, because I've been trying forever and you apparently couldn't hear me. So my colleague said something about I don't know, is it the ability to complete the book or what? But I have another thing to add about this, because, for example, I didn't like the excerpts that you from The Handmaid's Tale. But still, we analyzed it and we extracted some points. For example, the alienation of women. For example, the hatred that you feel while reading the text, the gloomy language, a lot of metaphors, a lot of similes. But still, I don't like the idea. You feel that it's a part of religion, but it's not. It's not cultural sensitive, as I'm Arab Muslim. It's not sensitive with my. It doesn't align with my beliefs. So again, thank you for this inspirational session, and that's it.
Thank you so much. If I could just quickly respond, sorry about that, Anita. And thank you so much, Sahar. I totally understand where you're coming from. And I think, yeah, that's definitely something we need to always, be mindful of, is the cultural sensitivity. When I wrote my book, Sand Roses, I actually even struggled with writing some of the scenes in it because, it's a book about women who fight, who go through a lot of forms of oppression, including physical and sexual harassment. And then when I was working with my editor, there were times when sort of we were thinking of specific themes, and she was encouraging me to elaborate a bit more. And I didn't feel comfortable doing that. But also in the back of my mind, it was like, yes, this is very difficult to do, but we're trying to capture a real authentic experience from a human point of view. And then from that, we had to make it as realistic as possible. I also understand that my book and also a lot of other books may not, align with a lot of people's values. And we try to have also like a little bit of a disclaimer at the beginning. And that, so if anybody doesn't feel comfortable with it, they're free not to read it or maybe to stop in the middle. And I definitely respect that. And I think, again, the whole point is to try to tell as much of an experience as possible. Sometimes it is intimate, sometimes it is sensitive. And I think it's just important for us as readers to make that choice and then go with it. But thank you so much for that, Sahar.
Thank you so much. I think there's no more questions from the participants. Thank you so much, Hamza, for the insightful and deeply engaging session. I'm sure our participants are walking away with a richer understanding of how literature can act as a mirror for the world we live in. Now I request Jill Richens to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. My camera's gone, but I hope you can see me. I can't see myself. But I wanted to say thank you so much, Hamza. You'd asked us quite a lot today about the emotions that have been evoked, and I wanted to share a few emotions that I feel after this session. I feel curious. I feel a sense of curiosity to go and kind of read more, partly some of the suggestions that have been raised on the chat, some of the books that you spoke about in your session today. And I also feel joy. I know we've just read some quite difficult text, but thinking about the potential of literature and what literature does in terms of, you mentioned kind of imagine worlds of the past, but also imagining the future. So I also feel quite joyful and quite hopeful as well. I particularly enjoyed what you were talking about when you were referencing To Kill a Mockingbird and kind of something that was written in the 60s, but also when you were talking about gender and how some of that literature had maybe started a bit earlier than then. So it really got me thinking about when literature of this nature kind of started and thinking about the moments in time where people were writing in this way and also what will happen going forward. I feel like I've read quite a lot on migration, but I loved the term cli-fi. That was a new one for me around climate. So that's something personal I'll take away as well. So, but yeah, on behalf of myself, and I'm sure everyone here, thank you so much for such a rich and thought-provoking session, along with a reading list, which is rare to get. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill Richens. So it's definitely, we are happy that you have joined here today as a chief guest. So for gracing this, wonderful evening session. Thank you all for joining the session. We have shared a feedback link in the chat box. I request you all to give your feedback. So your feedback truly matters to all. So thank you in advance for taking the time. Thank you so much. Thanks, Nidhi. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Hamza. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. This was brilliant.
Thank you, Noor.
Thank you, Noor.
I can't see the link for the feedback. Could you please resend?
Yes, it's in the chat, Sahar. Be able to see?
I even send nope in the chat box, and apparently it doesn't go through.
It's already in the chat box. Yeah.
Is the link to the feedback going to be sent by email? Because I still can't see.
We can if you could share your email ID in the chat box.
Apparently, my messages don't go through. I don't know why. So at the beginning, I couldn't. My voice didn't go through. Now my messages don't go through. So, anyways, okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Bye-bye.